If any party is responsible for the assassination of Joseph and Hyrum Smith, prophet of the Mormon Church, it was the Southern Democrats, and it was done by their brothers in crime, the Quorum of the 12, or the Quorum of the 12 Traitors, and it all begun in the Missouri 1838 Mormon Wars that resulted in the exile and extermination of the peace-loving anti-slavery Mormon movement led by Joseph Smith. So let's listen to what John D. Lee has to say about the Mormon Wars, which he participated in as a major false flag for the pro-slavery, pro-William Boggs, William Lilburn Boggs, his former employer and mentor, and Brigham Young, his adopted father.
The 1838 Mormon War, also known as the Missouri Mormon War, was a conflict between Mormons and non-Mormons in Missouri from August to November 1838, the first of the three Mormon Wars. Members of the Latter-day Saint movement, founded by Joseph Smith, had gradually migrated from New York to northwestern Missouri since 1831, mainly settling in Jackson County, where tensions with non-Mormon residents led to episodes of anti-Mormon violence. The Mormons were evicted from Jackson County in 1833 and resettled in new counties nearby, where tensions grew again and attempts to evict them resumed.
What Wikipedia fails to mention is that the Mormons did not slowly enter Missouri, but they were invited there as part of a military operation to vote out slavery in the Southern Democratic, south of the Mason-Dixon line states. Therefore, their activity was seen as a military offensive by the Southern Democrats, who instigated war, all-out war against the Mormons, and in doing so, they engaged certain Campbellite preachers such as Sidney Rigdon and the Quorum of the 12 to pretend to be Mormons and to fight on the side of the Southern Democrats. So if any party is responsible for Joseph Smith's eventual assassination, it is the Southern Democrats. And you will see later on in John D. Lee's testimony and other testimonies, the Warsaw Greys were not responsible for Joseph Smith's assassination at Carthage, but the military that was present at Carthage were the Virginia Southern Democrats of the Marion County Infantry. These militias spread out all along the Mason-Dixon line, 50 years before the actual outbreak of the Mormon War, outbreak of the Civil War. This was the Mason-Dixon line, was the war front between the Southern Democrats and the Northern Republicans, or the Northern Whigs. It's just amazing how history is whitewashed and deleted by those who don't want you to know that it was the Mormons that were probably the group that was most responsible for outlawing and abolishing slavery in the United States. And it was the Brighamite Southern Democrats that fought like the Dickens to keep slavery going, and Brigham Young had to invent his polygamy, in which he just enslaved women and children and called them a marriage partner and called them his adopted children. This is why polygamy was mainly outlawed, because it was a pretext for slave trading women and children. So let's continue with Wikipedia and the Mormon Wars that started at the brawl, or the riots, or the insurrection at the Gallatin polls, voting polls in Missouri. I believe about 3 miles from Adam on Diamond, the stake ran by a Quorum of the 12, Lyman White, who was also a danite, and had inducted John D. Lee into the secret assassination group called the Danites. And it was this group that ran the false flag of causing the Mormon Wars to flare up and resulting in pre-programmed Governor Boggs issuing an extermination proclamation exterminating the peace-loving anti-slavery Mormon settlements to leave the state of Missouri and resettle themselves in Illinois, the homeland of Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas, both anti-slavery politicians.
On August 6, 1838, the war began following a brawl at an election in Gallatin, resulting in increased organized violence between Mormons and non-Mormons backed by the Missouri Volunteer Militia in northwestern Missouri. The Battle of Crooked River in late October led to Lilburn Boggs, the governor of Missouri, issuing the Missouri Executive Order 44, ordering the Mormons to leave Missouri or be killed. On November 1, 1838, Smith surrendered at Far West, the church's headquarters, ending the war. Smith was charged for treason but escaped custody and fled to Illinois with the remainder of the estimated 10,000 Missouri Mormons, establishing the new settlement of Nauvoo.
Just another fact concealed over and over again by Brighamite Utah Mormons and other scholars is that Joseph Smith did not escape custody. He was released by Judge King, who never signed a transfer order, but just released him from Missouri to be escorted into Illinois under, I'm assuming, a treaty signed between the North and the Southern Democrats to release Joseph Smith, a military undercover agent for the Union, who was voting out slavery slowly in an effort to avoid civil war.
During the conflict, 22 people were killed, 3 Mormons and 1 non-Mormon at Battle of Crooked Creek, 1 Mormon prisoner fatally injured while in custody, 2, and 17 Mormon civilians at Hounds Mill 3, and an unknown number of noncombatants died due to exposure and hardship as a result of being expelled from their homes in Missouri. 4. All of the conflicts in the Mormon War occurred in a corridor 100 miles, 160 kilometers, to the east and northeast of Kansas City.
So let's listen to the testimony of John D. Lee from the grave, talking about how the Mormon Wars were pre-planned by the Southern Democrats and the Quorum of the 12.
20 miles northeast of my home was the settlement of Adarn-on-Diamond. It was on the east bank of Grand River, near the Three Forks. Lyman White was president of that stake of Zion. In July 1838, Levi Stewart and myself concluded to visit the settlement of Adam-on-Diamond. We remained overnight at the house of Judge Morning. He was a Democrat. He told us that, at the AP pro-aking election, the Whigs were going to cast their votes at the outside precincts early in the day, and then rush in force to the town of Gallatin, the county seat of Daviess County, and prevent the Mormons from voting. The judge requested us to inform our people of the facts in the case, and for us to see that the Mormons went to the polls in force and prepared to resist and overcome all violence that might be offered. He said the Whigs had no right to deprive the Mormons of their right of suffrage, that they had a right to cast their votes as free and independent Americans.
So what is significant about John D. Lee's witness testimony is, number one, the Mormon violence that occurred at the Gallatin polls was planned in advance, weeks in advance, by Southern Democrats. He said he met at the home of a Southern Democratic judge, Judge Morning, who warned him as a Mormon representative that the Whigs were going to try and prevent the Mormons from voting. Well, why would the Whigs try and prevent Mormons, anti-slavery Mormons, from voting? It was the Southern Democrats who were trying to run out the anti-slavery Mormons out of Missouri. And so John D. Lee shows his hand here by meeting at the home of a Southern Democrat, Judge Morning, who informs him of the pre-planned violence that was going to occur at the Gallatin polls and were going to be caused by the Southern Democrats and their Confederate companions, the Lyman White, Sidney Rigdon, and the Quorum of the 12. Of course, John D. Lee states he went away not really understanding what Judge Morning was saying, thinking he was just electioneering on behalf of his Southern Democratic Confederates, because, of course, the Mormons were going to vote, according to Joseph Smith, Whig. Joseph Smith was a Henry Clay Whig, anti-slavery Whig. So why would Joseph Smith be involved in trying to prevent the Mormons from voting at the Gallatin polls? Well, he wouldn't be. It was the Southern Democrats, the Quorum of the 12, the John D. Lee Danites, who formed a secret cabal, a secret organization to cause the Mormon Wars in Missouri that resulted in Joseph Smith peace-loving Mormons being thrown out of Missouri, and that was what their goal was. John D. Lee, the Quorum of the 12, and the Danites.
I knew that the two political parties were about equally divided in Daviess County, and that the Mormons held the balance of power and would turn the scale which. And I then thought he was trying to get up and carry out an electioneering job for his party, therefore I paid but little attention to what he said. On Monday, the 6th day of August, 1838, the greater portion of our people in the settlements near me went to Gallatin to attend the election. In justice to truth, I must state that just before the general election of August, 1838, a general notice was given for all the brethren of Daviess County to meet at Diamond. At that meeting, all the males over 18 years of age were organized into a military, according to the law of the priesthood, and called the Host of Israel. First rank was a captain with 10 men under him. Next was a captain of 50, that is, he had 5 companies of 10. Next, the captain of 100, or of 10 captains, and companies of 10. The entire membership of the Mormon Church was then organized in the same way. This, as I was then informed, was the first organization of the military force of the Church. It was so organized at that time by command of God. Commanded Joseph Smith to place the Host of Israel in a position for defense against the enemies of God and the Church.
Just a reminder, John D. Lee is writing 20 years after this incident. He had never actually met Joseph Smith by this time. He had gone straight from William Boggs, Little Burn Boggs mercantile store into Adam Dion, Daviess County, and met Lyman White, and then was organized into a secret Danite assassination team. So whether or not you want to believe John D. Lee that somehow Joseph Smith, who is over in the next county in Caldwell County, knew about the organization of this Mormon warrior group called the Host of Israel, I don't know. I don't believe that Joseph Smith would be fighting against himself, since Joseph Smith was leading Mormons into voting anti-slavery, and John D. Lee obviously was pro-slavery and voted with Brigham Young and worked with the Southern Democrats by visiting Kentucky and Tennessee on all his travels to enlist Southern Democrats into the upcoming wars against the Mormons. So whether or not you want to believe John D. Lee, whether he actually believed that Joseph Smith was involved, even though he had never yet met Joseph Smith, who knows? But this is John D. Lee's testimony. But it does give some information regarding the insurrection that happened at the polls in Gallatin. That was triggered and pre-planned by the Quorum of the 12, Lyman Wright. They also say in other publications, Sidney Rigdon was also responsible for organizing this militia of Mormon warriors to start causing the border wars in Missouri that eventually resulted in the hot flash proclamation of exiling Joseph, number one, imprisoning Joseph Smith under threat of execution. And just recall that it was the Quorum of the 12 that testified against Joseph Smith in this Missouri execution threat and prosecution for treason. Orson Pratt was responsible, and then also I think you should be alerted that the only Quorum member that was killed was Quorum of the 12 President Patton, President Fear Not. Okay? Now, I just want to remark that for some reason, whenever Brigham Young is involved in any operation, people above him always end up dead. Not only Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, but I believe that Brigham Young also targeted John Taylor in the Carthage jail assassination, and John Taylor barely escaped with his life. That's why John Taylor went into hiding. He was hiding from Brigham Young's bloody assassination attempts. Just my speculation at this point.
Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. At the same conference, another organization was perfected. Then first formed, it was called the Danites. Members of this order were placed under the most sacred obligations that language could invent. They were sworn to stand by and sustain each other, sustain, protect, defend, and obey the leaders of the church under any and all circumstances unto death, and to disobey the orders of the leaders of the church, or divulge the name of a danite to an outsider, or to make public any of the secrets of the order of Danites, was to be punished with death. And I can say of a truth, many have paid the penalty for failing to keep their covenants. They had signs and tokens, use and protection. The token of recognition was such that it could be readily understood, and it served as a token of by which they could know each other from their enemies, though they were entire strangers to each other. When the sign was given, it must be responded to and obeyed, even at the risk or certainty of death. A knight that would refuse to respect the token and comply with all its requirements was stamped with dishonor, infamy, shame, disgrace, and his fate for cowardice and treachery was death. This sign or token of distress is made by placing the right hand on the right side of the face, with the carrot points of the fingers upwards, shoving the hand upwards until the ear is snug up between the thumb and forefinger.
Now, I hope you caught that. That was the secret sign and token of the secret organization and of assassins called the Danites. You place your hand up to your cheek, place your hand to your ear, and then pull it down your cheek. These are secret signs that the false flag assassins, Danites, who pretended to be Mormons, who pretended to be Missouri settlers, and caused the false flag insurrection at the Gallatin polls, which led to the ultimate extermination of the peaceful Mormons out of Missouri. This is the sign and token, their very secret Kabbalistic sign and token of their assassins, where they could recognize their brothers in arms, the secret red brothers in arms called the Danites.
I here pause and ask myself the question, am I justified in making the above statement? I ask those who think I am not fully justified in telling all I know, to wait until they read the whole story, how I have been ordered, how I have orders, and how treacherously I have been used and deserted by the church and its leaders. It is my purpose and intention, for such is my certain duty, to free my mind and bring to light some of the secret workings, some of the deeds of darkness that have been the result of the evil teachings of aspiring men who have tried to couple their vile acts with the gospel of truth, and endeavored, alas, too successfully, to palm it off on the credulous and weaker-minded brethren as a religious duty they owed to God, to unquestioningly obey every order of the priest. Hood. To return to the election at Gallatin, the brethren all attended the election. All things seemed to pass off quietly, till some of the Mormons went up to the polls to vote. I was then lying on the grass with MacBreer and a number of others. As the Mormons went to the polls, a drunken brute by the name of Richard Weldon, stepped up to a little Mormon preacher, by the name of Brown, and said, "Are you a Mormon preacher, sir?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Do you Mormons believe in healing the sick by laying on of hands, speaking in tongues, and casting out devils?" "We do," said Brown. Weldon then said, "You are a liar. Joseph Smith is a imposter." With this, he attacked Brown and beat him severely. Brown did not resent it, but tried to reason with him, but without effect. At this time, a Mormon, by the name of Hiram Nelson, attempted to pull Weldon off of Brown when he was struck by half a dozen men on the head, shoulders, and face. He was soon forced to the ground. Just then, Riley Stewart struck Weldon across the back of the head with a billet of oak lumber and broke his skull. Weldon fell nearly on me and appeared lifeless. The blood flowed freely from the wound. Immediately, the fight began. Gallatin was a new town with about 10 houses, 3 of which were saloons. The town was on the bank of Grand River. And heavy timber came near the town, which stood in a little arm of the prairie. Close to the poles, there was a lot of oak timber, which had been brought there to be riven into shakes or shingles, leaving the heart taken from each shingle block the ground. These hearts were 3 square, 4 feet long, weighed about 7 pounds, and made a very dangerous yet handy weapon, and when used by an enraged man, they were truly a class of instrument to be dreaded. When Stewart fell, the Mormons sprang to the pile of oak hearts, and each man, taking one for use, rushed into the crowd. Mormons were yelling, "Save him!" And the settlers yelled, "Kill him, him!" The sign of distress was given by the danites, and all rushed forward, determined to save Stewart, or die with him. One of the mob stabbed Stewart in the shoulder. He rose and ran, trying to escape, but was again surrounded and attacked by a large number of foes. The danite sign of distress was again given by John L. Butler, one of the captains of the host of Israel. Butler was a brave, true man, and a leader that it was a pleasure to follow where duty called. Seeing the sign, I sprang to my feet and armed myself with one of the oak sticks. I did this because I was a danite, and my oaths that I had taken required immediate action on my part, and support of the one giving the sign. I ran into the crowd. As I reached it, I saw Nelson down on the ground fighting for life. He was surrounded by a large number who were seeking to murder him, but he had a loaded whip, the lash wrapped around his hand, and using the handle, which was loaded with several pounds of lead, as a weapon of defense. He was using it with effect, for he had men piled around him in all shapes. Pro 8, a man sprang to his feet. He had just been knocked down by Nelson. As the man was rising, Nelson gave him a blow across the loins with the handle of his whip, which had the effect of straightening out the villain on the grass, and rendered him an inoffensive spectator during the remainder of the play. Captain Butler was then a stranger to me, and until I saw him give the danite sign of distress, I had believed him to be one of the Missouri ruffians, who were our enemies. In this contest I came near committing a serious mistake. I had raised my club to strike a man, when a Missourian rushed at him and struck. -60 Mormonism unveiled him with a loaded whip and called him a Mormon. The man then gave the sign, and I knew how to act. Captain Butler was attacked from all sides, but, being a powerful man, he used his oak club with effect and knocked a man down at each blow that he struck, and each man that felt the weight of his weapon was out of the fight for that day at least. Many of those that he came in contact with had to be carried from the field for surgical aid. In the battle, which was spear-eyed but short in duration, 9 men had their skulls broken, and many others were seriously injured in other ways. Severe treatment of the mob by the danites soon ended the battle. 300 men were present at this difficulty, only 30 of whom were Mormons, and only 8 Mormons took part in the fight. One was an entire stranger to all who were engaged in the affray, except Stewart, but I had seen the sign, and, like Samson, when leaning against the pillar, I felt the power of God nerve my arm for the fray. It helps a man a great deal in a fight to know that God is on his side. After the violence had ceased, Captain Butler called the Mormons to him, and as he stood on a pile of building timber, he made a speech to the brethren. He said that his ancestors had served in the War of the Revolution to establish a free and independent government, one in which all men had equal rights and privileges, that he professed to be half white and free-born, and claimed a right to enjoy his constitutional privileges, and would have his rights as a citizen if he had to fight for them, that as to his religion, it was a matter between his God and himself.
Now, I hope you caught that. Captain Butler, Mormon, was being prevented from voting because he was, quote unquote, half white. In fact, all the Mormons were called Mormons, North African Moors, because they were interracial. Most citizens at the time of the 1850s who were pre-revolutionary immigrants were all interracial, because as you recall, the Virginia Company only had 1,500 men on its boat to populate the entire United States, and yes, they had their country wives or Native American brides, and they had their British brides, in which they had
Driven from the polls. Several of the Gentile leaders then requested us to lay down our clubs and go and vote. This Captain Butler refused, saying, "We will not molest anyone who lets us alone. But we will not risk ourselves again in that crowd without our clubs." The result was, the Mormons all voted. It is surprise. After voting, the Mormons returned home, fearing additional violence if they remained. It may be well for purposes of explanation to refer back to the celebration of the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July, 1838, at Far West. That day Joseph Smith made known to the people the substance of a revelation he had before received.